Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aaron Dominguez, the Chair of the Awards and Facilities Committee, and welcome to this open committee meeting. Members of the Awards and Facilities Committees are Julia Phillips, Vice Chair, Matt Malkin, Scott Stanley, and Alan Stern. And before we get started, I'd like to call your attention to the schedule of the upcoming context and action items, which is in tab 1.1 of your diligent board book. And you'll see that in May, it's shaping up to be a busy month, and we expect the NSF to be bringing 5 actions to us for consideration, including the Operations and Management Awards for NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and the Ocean Observatories Initiative, as well as the National Ecological Observatory Network, or NEON. So, in addition, NSF will also present the context of future actions, including a request for a proposal for a vessel integrator for the Antarctic Research Vessel and for the Operations and Management Award for the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. So thank you in advance for all of you serving as reviewers and discussants for these important items. So to begin, our first information item is risk management for NSF major facilities, for which we have 30 minutes budgeted in today's meeting. And for today's open session, we'll hear from the NSF's Chief Officer for Research Infrastructure, Linnea Avalone, and she will provide the committee with an overview of how NSF is approaching risk management across all of our major facilities portfolios. And now I'll turn the floor over to Linnea.
I have shared my screen. Can everyone see that? Yes. Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Thank you, Aaron. At the request of ANF, I'm here to provide this presentation on NSF's approach to risk management for the major facilities. I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the elements of NSF's risk management, followed by 3 examples, and I welcome your discussion and questions at the end. NSF has a tiered and somewhat hierarchical approach to risk management. I will walk through each of the tiers briefly. At the base level is the awardee, the managing organization for each facility. Awardees are expected to develop and maintain project or facility-specific risk registers. Next is the program staff and the integrated project team, or IPT. The IPT is composed of the program officer, the grants and agreements officer, and a liaison from the large facilities office. The IPT engages in day-to-day oversight of the awardee and tracks progress or accomplishments against plan. Division and directorate leadership oversee the work of the staff, review proposal actions for sufficiency, and ensure the annual reviews are conducted according to policy. Grants and agreements officers and other BFA staff are responsible for financial oversight, such as business systems reviews and award management activities, including cost analysis and incurred cost audits. The large facilities office and the CORF provide oversight of both internal and external review processes. LFO takes primary responsibility for development of internal and external guidance, such as the Research Infrastructure Guide and our standard operating guidance, while the CORF office manages internal governance, such as facilities readiness panels and facilities governance board, each of which consider risk in its deliberations. At the agency level, risk elements related to research infrastructure are incorporated into NSF's Enterprise Risk Management Framework, with a focus on internal controls and awardee oversight processes. Finally, external groups, such as the Office of the Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office, conduct annual reviews of NSF's oversight of research infrastructure with attention to risk management. It is a testament to NSF's strong risk management practices that GAO has issued no new recommendations in its annual audit of NSF's major facilities since 2019. In these next slides, I'm going to walk through some generic case studies following the framework I just outlined on the previous slide. In the interest of time, I'm going to focus on just the key elements in each case. So let's start with a project that's in the construction stage. As before, at the base is the awardee, the organization managing the construction or acquisition. The awardee is responsible for identifying risks associated with the project, assessing and tracking them, and reporting back to NSF. Risk registers for the current construction projects have hundreds of entries each. Formal monthly reporting to NSF on the project status, including on risks retired or realized, is required. The IPT is the primary NSF group monitoring project status and progress. Budget and schedule are closely tracked. The IPT also coordinates formal annual construction reviews with external expert panels. One of the important risk management activities conducted by BFA is its annual review of the project's earned value management system, which tracks adherence to cost and schedule. And at an agency level, the CORF office holds meetings with the IPT twice annually to maintain awareness of the project's progress. So now let's consider what happens if a risk is realized. All of the current construction projects have a risk related to commodity volatility, which is something really easy to imagine in the current inflationary environment. Awardees are expected to properly assess the risk and its effects on project cost and schedule, and to develop a formal contingency use request, or CUR, to submit to NSF. Members of the IPT review the CUR and recommend it for funding as appropriate. Staff in BFA ensure that the submitted costs are reasonable. The CORF and the Chief Financial Officer have control over the MREFC account, so if additional contingency funds need to be obligated to the project, we must approve that. In extraordinary circumstances, a project experiencing challenges may be added to the Office of the Director watch list. And finally, GAO pays particular attention to realized risks in its annual review of NSF major facility projects. So let's turn now to facilities and operation. Risk management processes for facilities and operations are similar to those in construction, but not quite identical. In the next two slides, I'll point out some of the important differences. Awardee and IPT responsibilities are largely the same. Note, in particular, the expectation that awardees develop plans for maintenance of the facility. Annual reviews in this context focus on the annual work plan for the facility and the prior year's accomplishments. Division and directorate leadership play important roles in oversight of annual award increments, verifying that annual reviews have been conducted and that budget amounts are appropriate. Grants and agreements officers in BFA conduct either cost analyses or review of budgets for annual increments, assuring that the costs are reasonable and allocable. And the CORF office meets annually with the IPTs of facilities and operations and establishes, in conjunction with the directorates, the annual funding plan for operations and maintenance. As with the construction example, let's assume a risk is realized. In this case, I've chosen component failure. That could be something as simple as a generator, it could be an important optical component, it could be an aircraft engine, or any number of other things. It's the awardee's responsibility to assess and report the damage and to develop plans for replacement or repair. Should the cost be beyond what can be accomplished in the organization's O&M budget, the awardee would develop a supplement request to NSF. There is no formal contingency on NSF major facility O&M awards as there is in construction awards, so we rely on the supplement funding mechanism. Members of the IPT review the supplement funding request, and division leadership provides concurrence. As before, BFA is responsible for assuring that proposed costs are reasonable and for making the award. The CORF office is generally not involved in these types of situations unless a failure is significant or results in loss of functionality or science capacity. In the event of a severe incident, though, the CORF is involved in the agency's response and coordinates with OLPA and others on communications. As a final example, I'll talk a bit about risk as captured in NSF's Enterprise Risk Management Framework. I'm going to describe here one of the facility-related entries. That risk is that major and mid-scale research infrastructure programs are subject to waste, fraud, and abuse. Several causes why that risk might appear have been identified, including lack of clear internal and external guidance on processes and expectations, and insufficient post-award cost monitoring. There are several risk mitigation measures that are called responses in the ERM framework. So I'm going to read through these and give you some examples. The first is to revise and implement guidance. This includes things such as the standard operating guidance for budget contingency and for making decisions on whether to renew or compete the O&M award for a major facility or to recommend the facility's disposition. Outreach to staff is another response. This is critical to ensuring that those involved in the oversight of research infrastructure understand their roles and responsibilities. To that end, LFO conducts bi-monthly program officer forums to facilitate information sharing, and the CORF office and LFO convene the major and mid-scale facilities working group with members from each directorate, which meets monthly. Outreach to recipients, award recipients, ensures that they are aware of NSF's policies, procedures, and expectations. Such outreach occurs through the annual Research Infrastructure Workshop and webinars, and through the online Knowledge Gateway that's managed by LFO. And finally, as part of NSF's implementation of the Program Management Improvement Accountability Act, we've developed a competency model for members of the IPT and an associated curriculum of training to ensure that staff have the requisite skills to oversee the research infrastructure portfolio. Together, these mitigations are judged to make the impact of the risk, should it be realized, low, and the likelihood of it actually occurring very low. With that, I will conclude, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Linnea. I've got a few questions, but we can start here. If you want to use your raise hand option for those feature for those of you who are on Zoom, please use that. But I see that Alan Stern raised his actual hand, so I'll call on Alan first.
I was going for my virtual hand, but it's too slow. Thank you for that briefing and for all the work. Just a question about training and standards for the risk management that the individual projects do. Are they required to meet any particular standard or take any particular training in understanding risk management?
The awardees?
The awardees.
I am going to phone a friend. Where's Matt Hawkins? Matt, maybe you could come to the table because some of these questions are squarely in LFO's realm. Risk management is an agency-wide activity here, so I'm going to rely on a lot of our subject matter experts to answer the questions.
Can we hear that?
No.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Thank you. Don't push the mute button. Put my glasses on. Lesson number one. Yeah, so very good question. As far as our recipients go, a number of years ago, actually, I think this was a 2018 recommendation from GAO, as a matter of fact, is what are the competencies, the project management competencies required for our recipients, as well as the competencies required for our NSF staff. As Linnea said, NSF staff are being handled through implementation of the Program Management Improvement and Accountability Act. So that's completely separate for the feds.
Which I heard.
Right,
Yes,
right, exactly. For recipients, though, there's a whole table in the Research Infrastructure Guide that articulates the competencies that we now check as part of our annual review process that our recipients actually hold. One of those is risk management. So it's clearly, there's a table in the guide that shows this as well as a whole series of other competencies. It's required to be held by the team in some way, not necessarily key personnel. Mm-hmm. So they might have the project manager would obviously hold that competency, and others in his team would likely have training. But we rely on the recipient to actually articulate who holds those competencies as they put together their project team.
Thank you both.
Yep.
Julia Phillips.
Yeah, thanks very much, Linnea. I think this kind of follows on a conversation that we've had among the leadership of this committee with you, and the question is around kind of the portfolio across MREFC and how you think about sort of portfolio risks. There are a couple of aspects of that. There's one which is kind of the balance of the portfolio and how you think about that. That might be one risk that would arise at the portfolio, but every project could be doing great. Then there are others that sort of extend across different efforts, IT, cyber, all that kind of thing. Impacts pretty much everyone. The kinds of things that have reared their head in SAPR, where we are relatively sure that Antarctica, while an extreme case, is not the only place where there may be some issues of that sort. I'm wondering how you look at those really enterprise and portfolio risks as opposed to the individual projects, where it sounds like you have that well in hand, and we just haven't heard much about the other.
Sure, that's an important question, and we did discuss this briefly in one of our tag ups. So I think there are many approaches that we're taking depending on what the specific issue is. So I can address, for example, the harassment issue that you mentioned last, which is we're working with the Office of Equity and Civil Rights on assessing what our managing organizations are doing in that sphere. So we've done a data call, and we have a very exhaustive set of information now about what they're doing. So we're going to be working through that to understand whether there are areas in which we need to ask for more. If we think about cybersecurity, for example, we formed, I'm in the process of hiring somebody from my office who will be tasked with responding to the recommendations from our Jason study of a couple years ago. And we've also formed a cybersecurity cyber infrastructure working group for research infrastructure that Roland is co-leading with somebody from the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure. So we do have a variety of different mechanisms depending on what the specific area is.
Okay, and I think one thing that comes to mind is that some of these are sort of, the horse has already left the barn at some level, and clearly when that happens, it's got to be all hands on deck. What are you doing in terms of trying to be proactive in identifying enterprise-wide risks of that general sort so that the horse never has to leave the barn?
Right. And I think some of these, part of this is making sure that all the facilities do have very comprehensive risk registers and have risk management processes in place. And we identify things through those annual reviews.
And I'm sorry, just one last follow-up. So then do you look across those and roll them up into something that shows up at the enterprise level?
Yeah, so that's part of the reason that we have these annual meetings with the integrated project teams that Roland and I have instituted to try to understand what are the things that are coming to the forefront, what things are they seeing that maybe aren't so obvious, and to really get a much better portfolio-wide picture of challenges with the facilities.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Linnea. Suresh Babu has his hand up, and then I have a question after that.
Thank you. I have a ignorance on leads. Do they take insurance on big hardwares and everything? Does it occur at the institution level or at our program level? So what happens?
Yeah, insurance is a tricky question. So if it's something NSF owned, the government is self-insured, so there's no insurance per se. And we could spend an hour, right, Patrick and Matt, talking about insurance and what's allowable. So we'd be very happy to answer some questions if you have those.
Later?
Yeah,
okay,
offline would probably be better.
The coffee, thank you.
Linnea, tell us about evaluating risks on these large collaborative projects where we're collaborating with other countries and relying on them to deliver a key part of, I'm talking mainly about construction, but also in M&O, but construction. And now we've got, there's always problems going on in the world. Now we have some really big ones happening in Eastern Europe, and some of those are our current and previous collaborators. What's the thinking at the across the institution, the foundation about this?
Yeah, so I think there's responses at many levels on that, right? So I think all of the projects that have international collaborations have risks related to those collaborations or to deliverables from the partners in their risk frameworks already. We're also working with Rebecca Kaiser's office on thinking about where there might be risks related to partnerships or to research security from some of those international collaborations. So that would be my first two, and I would invite others who have. Matt, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think one of the biggest, this has actually come up in many international fora on research infrastructure investments, right? And one of the biggest questions, the two biggest things that are seen, I think, are a mutual understanding of who holds that particular risk for the contribution that's being made, right? Is it a financial contribution? Is it an in-kind contribution? And in the end, for the success of the project, if one partner fails to deliver, who then has to bring the bag of money to complete the project, right? It's a mutual understanding of that. And the biggest challenge goes to partners having different expectations on terminology, budget authority, where funding comes from, how quickly it comes. Every international partner is intrinsically different. And so the only way to really mitigate this risk is to get all those partners together early and get those things sorted out as early in the process as possible, because it's very almost like insurance, right? It's incredibly complex. And getting a mutual understanding of all those mechanisms is really what needs to be done from the get-go, because it's fundamentally different across the enterprise.
Yeah, and I'll just add that in one of my phone a friends online here, MPS is saying that if you look at, for example, the high luminosity LHC upgrade, an effort was made at the very beginning to minimize dependencies on deliverables from other countries and other groups, right? And to have very clear NSF scope that wasn't dependent on what others might deliver.
Great. Yeah, that's, of course, the project I'm most familiar with. And in fact, that was, and I would encourage that thinking when putting together these construction projects in the early days, to really think through ways to minimize risks so that you're not left holding an empty bag that needs to be full of money, right? Yeah. Any other questions for Linnea? Yeah. Please, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevon Stassen. Julia asked, one component of Julia's question really intrigued me, and I didn't quite hear the answer to it. It had to do with the intersection of risk management and portfolio balance. I was just intrigued by that and just invite you to offer a response.
It's a great question, and I don't have a really thorough answer to it, right? It's something that we are sort of evaluating on a case-by-case basis as new research infrastructure comes along. And we haven't in the past really taken a very formal approach, I think, in portfolio balance across the major facilities.
Suresh, you still have your virtual hand raised, but I presume it's.
My hand is gone.
Okay. Not yet. Any other questions for Linnea? Comments, Linnea? Any other comments from you? No. Great work. Thanks. I think there's been really great progress on risk management at the National Science Foundation over the past several years. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
It's really it's a team approach. So I certainly need to acknowledge all the work that's done by Matt's office and others in BFA, help from General Counsel, help from all the programs that manage the facility. So it's definitely a team effort.
Thank you. And then with that, this open meeting is closed or is adjourned, and we'll go ahead and end this session. Okay, so